Hello and welcome to our first webinar episode in our oral history series. My name's Taylor and I'm the project officer for Voices, the community story, and today we'll be talking a little bit about interviewing techniques. So just a little bit of background on me. I conducted my first ever oral history project last summer with the Scottish Council on Archives on a project called Voices, the Hebridean story. And so I thought I'd share with you some of the things I learned along the way in how to approach the interviewing process. Okay, so we all know that oral history has a vital place within our society. It has developed into an international movement, and these personal commentaries are the oldest form of historical inquiry. The rising popularity of the written word seen a decline in spoken testimonies and their value, but there's kind of been a surge of interest in how to conduct oral history projects, which is great. But why is oral history so important to our project specifically? So, oral history allows members of communities to share their own personal stories in a way that allows them to be recorded and preserved for generations to come. The longevity of an oral history recording is a fundamental attribute. The reality of life is captured in the voice of the person who has experienced these events, and their voice will be the one that continues to shed light on those experiences over the years as people are able to listen to and engage with the recordings. Importantly, oral history discourages sweeping stereotypes and it challenges prejudices that may exist because it allows each person who's interviewed to gain individuality and to take ownership of their own story, and they're able to present themselves and their story in the way that they want. And so this project is determined to capture and preserve the personal experiences of people from communities that might not currently feature or be represented within the National Sound Archives. And in order to make the content of the Sound Archives as representative as possible of Scotland, showing the truly diverse and multicultural country that we are, this project is encouraging underrepresented groups to share their stories of migration specifically, to have it solidified in history as a vital part of this country's cultural fabric. So moving on to the more practical realities of conducting the interviews. So I would say ensure that you've discussed off the record before you press record about what the interviewee is comfortable talking about. I would also set aside 10 to 15 minutes before every interview to talk them through the different consent forms that they will need to sign, what these mean, go through where their data will be stored, which will be all on the forms, and just getting them comfortable about what's going to happen to their information and how they're able to access it. I would also have an informal chat to get them more comfortable and feel more ease talking with you. And it's also really helpful to have a list of questions to refer to. We will have some provided for you for this project, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. And it can really help having questions there to kind of keep you on track, especially with interviewees who are slightly more shy or nervous, and they want more prompting. So it's always good to have a kind of list of questions that you would like to cover. So obviously every project is different, and the aims of the project will obviously impact the direction of your questioning. But for this project specifically, we're looking at stories of people who've experienced migration, a journey to Scotland from somewhere else, and so our questions are going to be focusing on past, present and future. For example, we would encourage the interviewee to talk about their favourite memories of home, what a normal routine was like, a day-to-day kind of experience was like, their favourite activities, and then we would transition to talk about their or their family members' journey to Scotland, the differences that they found, things they found difficult, things they've enjoyed, how they keep in touch with family, things like that, before talking about their future aspirations. Now there will be a list of these questions that can be found in our resources tab on our webpage, so I won't go into much more detail, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what we're thinking. And finally, it's also always a good idea, I think, to end with the question, is there anything you would like to cover that we haven't already? It's always good to kind of round off the interview that way, because it gives them the chance to kind of say anything that they haven't thought of during it, and sometimes it's a really good moment to get kind of like nuggets of information or stories that you might otherwise have missed. Okay, so when you're interviewing, just some things to consider. It is possible to maintain distance as an interviewer whilst still being personable and sympathetic, and so it is important to not express an excess of emotion, which sounds a bit robotic, I know, but it just means to keep in mind that acting in an over-familiar attitude towards the interviewee might kind of make someone feel uncomfortable, and trying to keep your interjections to a minimum, and refraining from saying something that might alter the direction of conversation, because you might miss out on something that they were planning on saying. Occasionally a small interjection can be helpful, especially to a nervous interviewee, but I would try and keep it to a minimum. And also respect the silence. Silence is a big part of oral history, and it's your best friend. It's very tricky to master, but it'll really help you kind of get a better quality of sound recording. Just kind of work on your more silent social cues, just positive encouragement, nodding, smiling, body language, everything that you would do in a normal conversation, but just try to limit the sound. And I would also say maybe tell your interviewee this before you start, just so that they're aware that you're going to be a bit more quieter than normal, than you would be in a normal conversation. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so during the interview, you will, at the start of the interview, you should begin by stating your name, stating the interviewee's name and the location of the interview and the name of the project that the interview is for. So Voices, the community story in this case. It's also quite helpful to gain some biographical information from the interviewee at the beginning, such as their date of birth, place of birth, parents' occupations, just to kind of put them more at ease, get them comfortable with answering questions. And it's also good to kind of lay the foundations and contextualise the interview that's going to happen. I would also say try and speak clearly, obviously, but also at a slightly slower pace than you might conversationally use. Nothing too extreme, obviously, but it gives the interviewee time to consider all the things that you're saying, and it also kind of gives the impression that you're very calm and relaxed, and that will hopefully transfer onto the participant, the interviewee. So I would say, just make sure you're speaking slightly slower and clearly, which will also help people listening to the recording and anyone doing the summary afterwards. And also, obviously, don't interrupt, as we said before, even conversationally or a friendly one that you would normally do in a conversation. Work on those silent cues, silent encouragement. Difficult to master, but it's a big part of oral history. I definitely struggled with it and still do. I think everyone does, but as long as you're mindful of it, then you'll be completely fine. Okay, so just some kind of oral history principles to try and follow, and it will hopefully help your interviewing process. So follow-up questions are the backbone of oral history, I think. Like, they will help structure the direction of the interview. Obviously the interviewee themselves will hopefully do that, but the follow-up questions are really going to help guide them, and how the story will take shape depends on your follow-up questions. So it is vital that you listen really very carefully. And along that same vein, active listening is also vital in oral history. So if you're actively engaging with your interviewee and they're aware of your interest, then they're going to be more confident in what they're saying, and they're going to know that their story has value, which is the whole point of this project. So active listening, so that you're able to provide the really strong follow-up questions, is going to make the recording even better. Having emotional awareness, I would say, is really important. So obviously, if the interviewee is in distress, ask them if they would like to pause and then start the recording again if they feel comfortable. This is completely fine, and very normal, and it'll just mean you have more than one track and you can label them track 1, 2, 3. There's not a limit to the amount of tracks you can have, and you can just label them in the summary. That is not a problem. We'll also talk about how to deal with that situation in the next slide. Okay, confidence is a major thing, I think, when you're conducting, especially if it's your first time conducting oral history. It feels like there is quite a lot of rules and whatnot, and I think the main thing is, as long as you're aware that you have to remain as silent as possible while still making someone feel comfortable, and realising that we use these skills on a daily basis. You're socialising, your social cues, everything is the same. You're just having maybe a more silent conversation on your end, but don't let the slightly formalised setting of the interview put you off. Have confidence, because everyone starts somewhere, and there is no completely right way to do oral history. There's just these guidelines that we follow to try and make the sound recording as good as it can be. So try not to stress too much. If you do your best, it's going to be a great recording anyway. And also trust your instincts. Oh gosh, two very cheesy ones, but it's true. It just comes with practice, I think, but you'll obviously be able to tell. Again, I'm saying social cues, but your intuition will tell you if someone's uncomfortable, when they would probably like to kind of move on from that particular area of conversation. So again, active listening, good follow-up questions, and just trust your instincts, and you'll be completely fine and get some really good recordings. So Vickers highlights that whilst the legal and ethical guidelines of oral history are widely taught and practiced, there is a lack of information when it comes to reacting to and dealing with trauma-inducing topics in the moment, in the actual interview. And some processes that Vickers has adopted during her years as an oral historian are founded in transactional analysis, which is a style of therapy. And they are centred around trying to give the power and decision making back to the interviewee, because often trauma stems from the powerlessness and that the individual felt while they were in the situation. And so by allowing them to decide if they want to, pause the interview, move to a different location, change the topic of direction or direction of conversation, this can really help to refocus them and make them feel safe. Vickers, she also highlights the importance of acknowledging the value of what they've contributed. So acknowledging and expressing gratitude for their time and their story is really important. They need to understand and realise how valuable their own story is and why it's so important that it's included in this project. And also it's important that the oral historian doesn't feel the need to be or attempt to adopt the role of a therapist. A reason that the interviewee might have felt comfortable disclosing their story to the interviewer might be because they're a stranger, and so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be empathetic or supportive, but you should be aware of your limits as an oral historian, and maybe at the end of the interview pass over the details of someone you think could help offer them support in the proper capacity. But obviously does not mean you'll not be sympathetic or humane. It just means acknowledging the line between the two and kind of not making anyone uncomfortable. Okay, so that's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions about the interviewing techniques or the project in general, please email myself or Audrey. Our emails are on the screen. If you also have just general interest in the project webpage is also linked on the screen. And also stay tuned for our upcoming webinar episodes. They're going to be provided by Connor from Scotland Sounds at the National Library of Scotland, and he's going to be talking about the more technical side of things to interviewing, so how to use a Zoom recorder, how to record virtually and in person, and also talk about some editing tips and tricks on Audacity and file labelling. So there's a lot of good stuff coming up, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much.